There are evenings in early winter when the world feels softer than usual. The snow falls in a quiet, steady rhythm. The road hums beneath your tires, and the air carries that familiar scent of cold pine and wood smoke that many of us remember from long ago. On one such evening, Daniel Harper was driving down a narrow, tree-lined road just outside a small Ohio town. Daniel was 46 years old, broad-shouldered, calm-eyed, the kind of man whose face showed both strength and gentleness at the same time. His brown hair was touched lightly with gray at the temples, and he wore a simple white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. On his wrist was an old leather watch his father had once worn. He had been a single father for nearly 7 years. His daughter, Emily, was 16 now, old enough to borrow the car, old enough to roll her eyes at his dad jokes, but still young enough to hug him before bed when she thought he was having a hard day. That evening, Daniel was on his way to something he hadn't done in a very long time, a blind date. Emily had insisted. "Dad," she had said that morning, leaning against the kitchen counter with her cereal bowl in hand, "you can't spend the rest of your life fixing everyone else's problems and ignoring your own happiness." He had smiled at that. He wasn't ignoring happiness. He just wasn't chasing it. But something about her hopeful expression made him agree. So there he was, driving carefully through the falling snow, heading toward a cozy little restaurant on the edge of town. His nerves weren't wild, just steady, thoughtful, like a man stepping into something unfamiliar but not frightening. And then, just ahead in the pale blue wash of winter twilight, he saw headlights. A car was pulled off to the side of the road. The hood was up. Snow dusted the windshield and roof. Another vehicle idled behind it with its headlights glowing warmly through the trees. Daniel slowed. He could have kept driving. He was already running a little late. The roads were slick. The evening was cold. But he remembered his father's voice from decades ago. "If you can help, you help. Doesn't matter if you're busy." So he eased his truck onto the shoulder. When he stepped out, the cold bit gently at his cheeks. Snowflakes clung to his hair. He walked toward the open hood, where a young woman stood wrapped in a long blue coat. She looked to be in her late 30s, dark hair falling softly around her shoulders. She held a paper coffee cup in both hands, more for warmth than for drinking. Her expression wasn't dramatic, just tired, concerned. "I'm sorry," she said softly when he approached. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, it just..." stopped. Daniel gave a small, reassuring nod. "Cars have a way of picking their worst moments," he replied gently. Her eyes were steady and observant, the kind of eyes that notice details. Behind them, another car's headlights shone toward them, its engine running. Waiting, Daniel leaned over the engine, holding a small flashlight between his teeth for a moment before steadying it in his hand. The red of a loose cable caught his eye almost immediately. "Looks like your battery connection's come loose," he said calmly. "Nothing too serious." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Really? Really?" There was something comforting in the way he said it. Not rushed, not showy, just certain. He tightened the connection carefully, his fingers moving with the confidence of a man who had fixed lawnmowers, broken cabinets, scraped knees, and broken hearts. Snow settled lightly on his shoulders as he worked. The woman watched quietly. "You're going to freeze out here," she said after a moment. Daniel chuckled softly. "I've survived worse winters than this." And that was true. He remembered winters as a boy, helping his father shovel the driveway before school, warming his hands by the old radiator in their farmhouse kitchen, his mother's beef stew simmering slowly on the stove. Back then, people stopped for one another without thinking. Back then, kindness wasn't something you posted about. It was something you simply did. The cable tightened into place with a small click. "Try it now," he said, stepping back. She walked around to the driver's side and turned the key. The engine sputtered once, then came to life with a steady, grateful rumble. Her face lit up. "Oh, thank goodness." Daniel closed the hood gently and brushed snow from his hands. Behind them, the car with the headlights idling shut off its engine. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, walking toward them with calm, measured strides. Daniel stiffened slightly, not from guilt, just surprise. The woman stepped forward before the officers could speak. "It's all right," she said smoothly. "He was just helping." One of the officers nodded. "Yes, ma'am, ma'am." Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, and for the first time he noticed something different, the way she stood, the quiet authority in her voice, the subtle badge clipped just inside her coat lapel. She met his gaze and gave him a small, almost amused smile. I suppose I should introduce myself properly, she said. I'm Lieutenant Rachel Bennett. Daniel blinked. You're a police officer? 20 years, she replied calmly. Homicide Division. He looked at her again, really looked at her. The steadiness, the awareness, the quiet strength. Well, he said after a moment, I'm glad it was just a battery cable. She laughed softly at that, not loudly, just warmly. So am I. There was no embarrassment in her expression, no testing, no trap, just honesty. I was on my way to meet someone, she added. Blind date. Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. You don't say. She studied him for a brief moment. You, he nodded. Same. Snow continued to fall gently around them. The world felt still, suspended in that quiet pocket of winter evening. Rachel tilted her head slightly. And you stopped to help anyway. Daniel shrugged, almost sheepish. My daughter would never forgive me if I didn't. She smiled at that. She must have been the one who convinced you to go. She was. There was something deeply familiar in that exchange. Two adults who had lived long enough to know that life doesn't always unfold the way you plan. Two people who had carried responsibility on their shoulders for years. Rachel glanced toward the restaurant sign glowing faintly down the road. You're not headed to Miller's Tavern by any chance, are you? Daniel felt his heart shift just slightly. That's exactly where I'm headed. She let out a soft breath that turned into a gentle laugh. Well then, she said, I suppose this makes things easier. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The officers returned to their vehicle quietly, giving the two of them space. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, that familiar gesture of a man stepping into something unexpected. So, he said slowly, I guess I've already made my first impression. Rachel looked at him with kind, thoughtful eyes. Yes, she said, you have. And there, in the hush of falling snow and idling engines, something settled between them. Not fireworks, not drama, just recognition, the kind that comes later in life, the kind that says, I see who you are when no one's watching. They drove together to the restaurant, parking side by side. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them immediately, the smell of coffee, of roasted chicken, of fresh bread. They chose a quiet booth by the window where snow continued to fall in soft sheets. Over dinner, they talked about children, about long nights, about the ache of losing someone too soon, about the strange, quiet courage it takes to keep going anyway. Rachel spoke about her years on the force, the hard cases, the faces she never forgot, the way she learned to separate darkness from her own heart. Daniel spoke about raising Emily, about learning how to braid hair from online videos, about the first time she drove alone. They laughed, they paused, they listened, and in those pauses, there was comfort. Later, as they stepped back outside into the cold, Rachel looked up at the sky. You know, she said softly, in my line of work, you see a lot of what's broken in the world. Daniel nodded. I imagine you do. But tonight, she continued, I was reminded that there's still good out here, quiet good. Daniel gave a small smile. It's always been there, just doesn't make headlines. She reached out then, not dramatically, just gently, her gloved hand brushing his. I'm glad you stopped. He looked at her, snow catching in his lashes. So am I, and for those of us who have lived long enough to understand, we know it's rarely the grand gestures that change a life. It's the small ones, the ones done without applause, the ones done because that's simply who you are. Sometimes the road gives you a detour, sometimes it gives you a delay, and sometimes it gives you exactly who you were meant to meet. On an ordinary winter evening, under quiet falling snow,